good, whatever it happens to be where you are. You're very welcome along to the 10th in our series of webinars about parental alienation. This much misunderstood and seemingly very simple, yet apparently extraordinarily complex subject. We've heard in the past from judges, from experts, from victims, parents, male and female. And tonight at alienated.ie, we invite you to log in, and you can send comments during the, you can send questions during the webinar. I only have about 400 here to get through already. Because tonight we have a very special guest indeed. One of the big problems that parental alienation has is a lack of reliable research and industrial standards, for want of a better word, on which courts and barristers and solicitors can rely. Because there hasn't really been anyone who has pulled together all of the salient parts of the plethora of parental alienation peer-reviewed studies that there are out there until now. Enter tonight's guest, Denise McCartan, and this wonderful book, Parental Alienation, an evidence-based approach. To tell us all about it, good evening, Denise. Are you with us?
Hello, Ken. Hi, I'm Denise McCartan. It's very nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting me this evening.
It's a great pleasure, Denise. So tell me about, well, okay, so people will know that you're a court-appointed expert witness in these cases, but you have quite an extensive academic repertoire at this stage. I won't call it a qualification because there's too many of them. Rattle them off for me there, would you?
Yes, well, I have a PhD in neuropsychology and psychopharmacology from Queen's University, Belfast. And I have a second doctorate in clinical psychology from the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, King's College London.
Fantastic. And you have been working in this area for?
Since 2008.
Wow.
So quite a long time. I've seen over 1,000 families, I believe now.
And reported on them into courts?
Yes.
And I know you have worked in the Republic of Ireland, but the majority of your work is in the north, is that correct?
Majority is in the north. I've given evidence only once in the south, yes. Okay,
fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit about then what led you to deciding to put together parental alienation and evidence-based approach, please, Denise.
Well, I was invited to speak at a Lay Magistrate Association's annual conference, and the subject was contact. And of course, I went along very happily talking about contact and how wonderful it was, and what a great thing it was for children to be able to see both parents after the parents had separated, because that's what contact is. It occurred to me today when I was thinking about tonight's talk that not everyone might understand what we mean by contact, because it's quite a specific term. But anyway, I went along to this talk, and there were other speakers. There was a QC and a consultant psychiatrist, and there was a High Court judge as well. And they all spoke about contact.
QC, for those of us in the South, is a senior counsel.
QC is senior counsel, yes. And anyway, everybody spoke about contact, but their talks were quite different to mine. And it was really about the problems inherent in contact. And then when the discussion came up at the end of the lecture, the discussion was really, the thing that people were most interested in was why children didn't want to go to contact sometimes, and what to do if that happened. And so that was when I first realized this was a proper problem that I really hadn't come across before. So you see, when I talk about parental alienation, I have no interest, I have no financial interest, and I have no personal interest in parental alienation, if you like. So I come to it, I feel I come to it from a place that's, what would you say? I'm thinking a clean place in a way, you know, a place where I don't have any agenda. I don't have, my parents died when I was young, so I wasn't an alienated child. I have not been alienated from my children. I haven't been accused of alienation. So I feel that I come to this from a place where I didn't have my own personal agenda. I could just look at this and say, it is what it is. And that's why I wrote the book.
But you clearly felt that there was a need for a book, which is it fair to say it's rather more of a textbook than it is a sit down and be fundamentally possessed by the need to turn each page one by one?
Yes, that's true. It's a textbook, and it was intended to be a textbook. It says on the back of it, it's a textbook, and it was written. Routledge published it, and they tend to focus more on textbooks. And it was really intended for professional people. So, for those working with alienation, because it was something that I didn't learn about during training. And it's not something that you talk about during training or that's talked about, I feel, in professional circles very much, certainly in clinical psychology. Sorry?
Why is that?
I don't know. I actually didn't know I didn't even know it happened before I.
So there's an interesting point, isn't it? You as a professional psychologist went through the whole training and didn't even know this happened.
No.
Is it something that only happens to so few people that it really, goes under the radar? Because
well, that's the argument that some people make. But then, I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But Jennifer Harman has looked at this, and she's a researcher in the United States of America, and she has talked about this. And there have been a few studies that have looked at this and have found about a third of separated parents introduce parental alienation into their situation.
And with the increasing numbers of parents separating, if this is happening 33% of the time, that's quite a significant.
It's quite a high number, yes. Jennifer Harman reckons about 3.8 million children in the United States are affected by it.
Which is what, 1% of the population. So 1 in 100. And I suppose that's the child to whom it occurs, is it, as the victim?
Pardon, I don't. Sorry, what was the question?
The 1% that Dr. Harman has suggested is a good figure for parental alienation pertains to the victims thereof.
I think, well, what she's talking, I don't think I really understand the question totally, but I think
the number that she gave, is it for victims that parental alienation?
Victims, yes, it's for victims.
So because the thing that was occurring to me as you were saying that, Denise, is that for every victim, there's probably a family circle around them, aunties, uncles, grandparents. So you can take that number and probably multiply it quite significantly to get an accurate number for the number of people affected by this form of abuse.
Yes, I don't know how she arrived at that number, but it's still a high number. And in fact, my feeling
something that should be talked about in psychology school then.
Exactly. Well, I agree with you. I think that it should be talked about. I think that people are talking about it more now, but I feel that it's something that hasn't been talked about it typically.
Was there some kind of taboo around it? Because I talked when I first learned about it, I talked to a rather old-fashioned uncle of mine who said, "Oh, for God's sake, sure, that sort of thing. What is it called, parental alienation now? Oh, for God's sake, that's been going on for thousands of years. Women have been doing that to men for thousands of years. It's how they assault men." Of course, it's not just women that do it to men anymore, because we're in a much more egalitarian society, and it happens equally to women. It seems that it's peculiar that so many people know about this. They have different names for it, and yet it doesn't have any kind of formal recognition within the realm of the courts and the judiciary. We don't even have an official definition for parental alienation, which is recognized. It's still not recognized in the International Register of any kind of mental disorders. Would you touch on that for me as to why you think that might
Yes,
be?
well, I know why it's not. And I mean, the reason is because you're going to have to give a child, say that a child has got a mental health issue, which is a label, which psychologists wouldn't be terribly keen on that idea anyway. But you're going to give a child a label on the basis of a parent's behavior. Now, there are already a few labels that can be attributed to a child based on a parent's behavior, and one is child affected by relationship distress and things. There are a few different ones, and there are two diagnostic criteria used in the US and worldwide called the ICD and the DSM, and there are certain labels that can be used for children, but I mean the idea is not really to give children a label based on a parent's behavior.
I was actually thinking about a label for the disorder, not the person to whom it pertains being labeled. So a number of the psychologists that we've had on the program before, Denise, have said that it is not possible for any parent to parentally alienate their own child without they themselves suffering some kind of personality disorder, because it is just anathema to a human being to deliberately do something which so obviously is going to hurt their own child.
Yes, well, that's something I did plan on talking about a bit today, but yeah, there's a group in Italy who are looking at personality issues in parents who alienate children, and also personality of parents who are targeted by alienating parents. So there's a group in Italy. Some personality traits are overrepresented among alienating parents. That's what they found, and but there's no specific personality disorder that can be attributed to that makes alienating parents more likely to alienate their children.
Not narcissistic?
No, that has been floated, but that's not been proven, I don't believe, in a research point of view.
Well, look, I have 1,000 other questions to ask, but perhaps I don't want to preempt. I know you have a presentation ready for us. How long is your presentation, Denise?
Well, it's about 30 minutes, I think. Is that okay?
Would you be happy to just take us through that then, perhaps? And when it's finished, if there's any questions that I have, or indeed that come in from our viewers, repeatedly, I'll propose those to you afterwards.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very, very much. And I hope I don't repeat myself a little bit, but I might do. Sorry. I'll try not to. Oh.
There's always gremlins when you're live.
Oh, right. I see. So can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly, and now we can see your screen perfectly as well.
Okay. All right. All good. Thank you very, very much. Okay. So I've introduced myself, so I'll skip this one. I did that with Ken. He very kindly. I just wanted to say also thank you for inviting me. I can't actually remember if I said that or not. So what is parental alienation? I was just going to go through that today for anybody who didn't know. And it's a situation that occurs when one parent influences a child so that they no longer want to have a relationship with the other parent. Oh, here we're talking about gremlins. It gradually occurs during or after parental separation, when the child gradually stops seeing one of their parents. It often also involves grandparents, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but it often involves grandparents and other extended family members, and it's increasingly observed from contact. Parental alienation is a process. It typically happens over a period of time. It happens because the child says they no longer wish to go to contact. And initially, they can typically be persuaded to attend, but over time, the child will stop seeing the targeted parent and their extended family altogether. And efforts have been made, because this is on a continuum from, a child who doesn't want to go to contact to a child who doesn't mind going a little bit, or a child who goes and then they're okay once they get to contact. Some efforts have been made to describe this as mild, moderate, and severe alienation, and there are a few publications on this, which are very good and very helpful. Sometimes false allegations are made as a reason not to attend contact, and that is also part of the process of parental alienation, unfortunately. Sometimes allegations involve mistreatment and abuse, and they're not very comfortable for a targeted parent to hear that they've been accused of something that they didn't do. because they're not, when I say false, I mean, they're often not true, obviously. How did the interest come about? So this is what I talked to Ken about already, but I did a presentation to lay magistrates. And that was the start of my journey really on parental alienation. I also, at the same time, had an increasing number of requests for assessments in private family law cases where one parent alleged that parental alienation was a factor. Although I really, I mean, before I did the lay magistrates talk, I remember thinking, I'd had a few phone calls and I thought, gosh, how can this really happen? This can't be a real thing. But anyway, then I had telephone calls from professionals who were concerned about using the term because it was controversial, but everybody seemed to be aware that this happened. And I also had requests from parents who wanted me to support their decision to stop the child seeing the non-resident parent. And in fact, I started to get more of those. And when I asked if I could also speak to the non-resident parent, it typically, in my experience, those parents just went away. I didn't hear from them again. So this is the kind of thinking that I had when I went to give the presentation. I thought, there were lots of benefits to the children of having access to both parents, and that was my focus. My focus was on, and this was part of my learning, I have to say, is the benefits for the children to have access, for having access to both parents, was that they would enjoy better relationships with both parents. They had better social lives. There's been a recent study in Belgium on that. They have fewer emotional problems. Again, there was a recent study in Spain on that one. They're exposed to a wider range of experiences because, of course, children have, if they're going in and out of two homes, they'll see more, they'll have a wider range of experiences. And a recent study found that poor quality contact was found to be better than no contact unless the parent was abusive. So that was a study carried out in Norway. And I think that actually it's just good for children to know who their parents are. And most children want to know who their parents are. The prevalence of parental alienation is something that I've touched on with Ken tonight. And in the US, it's believed that between 1/4 and 1/3 of separated parents engage in parental alienation, which is believed to be around 3.8 million children in the United States. In Canada, it's believed to be, again, around 1/3 of separated parents, and Richard Borshak supervised this project in 2011. And in Ireland and the UK, we don't know what the prevalence is because no one has looked at it as far as I know. How does it happen? There are a number of potential sources for consideration. One is that the child is repeatedly told that the other parent is not meeting their needs. For example, they don't look after you like I do. I mean, everyone who works in this area will have heard this. Also, I meet children, and I'm sure other professionals do, who have memories. They say they have memories of events that happened before they were old enough to put down memories. I mean, children typically put down long-term memories when they're about 3.5. So before then, anything they remember is maybe a snapshot or a fragmented memory. But many children tell me, oh, Dad, threw me in the Christmas tree when I was a baby, or Mom hit me with a pan or something, when I was a baby. They're telling you things that happened before they're actually old enough to remember these things. There's a guy called Stephen C.C., and he's based in New York, and he has carried out some great studies of suggestibility in children. And it's a good avenue to think about in parental alienation, because are children suggestible? What CC found was that the younger a child was, the more likely they were to believe a story that they'd been told. So in one of his studies, where children were aged between 3 and 6 years old, children were repeatedly asked whether they'd ever had their finger caught in a mousetrap. The story was quite elaborate. It was a long story and involved going to hospital. But after 10 sessions, over 50% of the children told false stories. And CC said that sometimes children believed events that they only thought about. And this could happen up to the age of 9. He found that in subsequent studies, he found that children up to the age of 9 had problems remembering whether they thought something or whether it actually happened. And then experts couldn't determine what the truth was. And I suppose that's because the children actually believed it themselves. Another source of interest in relation to parental alienation relates to fears and phobias. Now, fear responses are learned, and most children aged between 4 and 19 years old have between 2 and 5 fears. They're typically benign and they relate to spiders, the dark, snakes, etc. And children can be genetically predisposed to experience fear, or they can learn to be afraid, or it can be a combination of the two. Anybody who works in psychology or who has studied psychology will know that we think a lot about these things, nature, nurture. But vicarious fear is of particular interest in parental alienation, because that involves learning to be afraid by observing another person's fear. And that could be how parental alienation develops. For example, if a parent presents as frightened of the other parent, then the child thinks, oh, well, there's obviously something to be afraid of, and then they become frightened too. Is it about the child? So are some children more easily manipulated than others? It's quite an interesting thing to think about, but hasn't been studied, but I hope that it will be in the future. And might a child be more similar to one parent than another? I'm looking at genetics for this, but Richard Warshak has written about this quite a lot. He's a person in America who writes quite a lot about parental alienation. And another thing is, how do we know the relationship between the parent and the child might not have broken down anyway? Because it could have done, and maybe, you know, the parents saying that parental alienation is a factor when it's not. Are there sometimes good outcomes in these cases? Well, a good outcome in my mind is safe contact with both parents if possible. A child isn't exposed to conflict and they're able to engage with life. Oh, crikey, sorry. They're able to engage with their life fully without thoughts or worries about their parents. And when you speak to school teachers, I have found this quite a bit. When you speak to school teachers, and they're the people who are seeing children every day. They're seeing the children every day, and they have no motivation for, typically anyway, they have no motivation for anything outside of the child's welfare. So when you speak to teachers quite often after this has been resolved, they say the child presents much more relieved and much more comfortable than they were before when they were involved in parental conflict. Now, this is an alienating dad, a targeted dad and his two children. Now, a good outcome in this situation, and I don't think it's a good outcome is the same for every situation, but a good outcome in this situation involved the dad having care of the children. When I met this dad, this is a difficult case because when I met the dad, he hadn't seen his children in a number of years, and you could see that they're still quite young when he finally they were moved to his care. They still see their mum, by the way, because I read time and time again that when alienated children are moved to a care of a targeted parent, they don't see their previously alienating parent before. That's not been my experience. When I've seen parents who've had the children moved to their care, the children do still have contact with both parents. And I think that should be part of our work that we want to do, is to try and help the children still see both parents so that they don't move to the care of the other parent and then become alienated again. Then the alienating parent becomes the alienated parent. So that's not what anybody wants. What everybody wants, as far as I can see, is for the children to be looked after and cared for by both parents and have relationships with both parents if they can. So it's a good outcome in that case. Alienating parents are often, but not always, the resident parents. So typically in this jurisdiction, there'll be a resident parent and then there'll be another parent who has contact, and they'll come and collect the children from home. Their shared residency does happen, but this is more typical. There's no gender difference in the likelihood of a parent alienating a child. Both parents, both genders are equally guilty of this, unfortunately. A primary motivation appears to be revenge, which is not one of our more attractive human traits, but that seems to be a primary motivation for alienation, and also wanting to be the preferred parent or avoiding time alone. Personality is a factor, and that study in Rome that I mentioned earlier found that people who are alienating parents are more likely to be extroverted, which is quite interesting. They're more vulnerable to stress, but they deny this, which is also interesting. But they struggle to understand the child's need to see both parents. So they think that I'm fine, I can manage this by myself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about revenge now. This results when someone perceives a wrongdoing by another. It's intended to cause harm and can be an action or a withdrawal. It's about, or withdrawing a child in this case. And it's about retribution rather than prevention of future harm. So it's about getting your own back, which makes it really unattractive, I feel. It's caused by anger, contempt, we think the other person's worthless, jealousy and envy. And revenge must be greater than the harm felt for the person to feel, who's carrying out the revenge, to feel satisfied, which makes the whole thing really not very nice. Parents with who alienate their children have been considered to have problems with boundaries. This has been written about quite a bit. What happens is the child becomes the focus of attention for the alienated parent. They become the alienating parent's friend and confidant. The child is encouraged to need the parent and is not encouraged to engage with their peers in a normal way. Or the child is concerned about the parent during their absence. And Richard Borshak, I seem to be talking about him quite a lot tonight, but he also wrote about this because he said that one child he saw, he found that they were concerned about whether or not the parent was taking the medication okay when they weren't with them. So the child was worried about the parent. Let's make sure I've got that okay. Yeah. Personality. So no one particular personality type has been identified, although some personality types are overrepresented, as Ken said, and he mentioned narcissism earlier, and that has been raised as a potential of interest, because people with narcissistic personality have difficulty empathizing with others. So it would fit in many ways with the alienating parent situation, because quite often alienating parents seem to struggle to understand that their child is going to be hurt by their behavior. Parents with who are alienating parents typically obtain high scores in social desirability. So they present as highly virtuous and they have no difficulties. And that has been my experience as well. They're narrow-minded and naive. But what's interesting is they think they present as differently to how they really present. They're vulnerable to stress, as we said, but they deny this. And they're confident and lack insight into their weaknesses. That's a study that was carried out in Rome. Oh, check. A few studies have looked at gender differences in the methods of alienation, and mothers were, depending on what study you looked at, some mothers were more or less likely to use denigration, so likely to criticize the father or the other parent. Some mothers were more likely to file false allegations. Fathers were more likely to use alienating behaviors, and they used the same ones, but more of them. So fathers were more likely to encourage a child to be defiant, and fathers were found to be both more and less aggressive than mothers, depending on what you read. So just checking it's all okay. So reasons for manipulation to be considered. I wonder, do mothers think they're safeguarding their children? Oh, sorry, not mothers, or whoever the alienating parent is. It can be mothers or fathers, actually. Do parents think they're protecting their children from someone they perceive as rejecting or a threat? But they usually chose that parent to have a child with, and yet they've decided to separate. So has their opinion about that parent's suitability for parenting changed? And if it has done, did they take advice about it, or is this something they decided themselves? Well, this person isn't fit to be my partner anymore, and they're not fit to be a parent anymore. It's just an interesting thing to think about. And also, is it rewarding? Do some parents enjoy being in control of their child, and then they find it rewarding to exclude the other parent who left them or failed in their relationship with them? And I think for some people that is a factor. But just based on the things that people say. Targeted parents are often, but not always, the non-resident parent. And as I said earlier, sometimes I see parents who alienate children from contact. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute or two. Targeted parents may contribute to the situation. There are research findings on this. And if the child observed conflict with the preferred parent, they can contribute to the decision not to see the targeted parent. sorry, part of my screen's blocked out, so I can't see that, what I've written there exactly. Typically, there's no disturbance in personality of a targeted parent, and a recent study found that they can be more socially isolated with a lower mood and more prone to conflict. And this was a study carried out in Italy. Grandparents are often always left out of this situation or stopped from seeing their children. I have permission also to share this picture with you. I didn't share any, I only have the 2 pictures, but I have permission to share them. In this particular situation, the parents were the childminders for these children until the parents separated. And when the parents separated, the grandparents didn't see the children anymore either. Once the dad stopped seeing the children, so did the grandparents. So it was very hard on them because of course, they loved the children and they missed them terribly. And they wanted to be part of their lives. So there had been an arrangement in this particular case for the grandparents to meet the children and take them for ice cream. And the mother met with the grandparents beforehand in the local social services building. And they were all going to go together. The arrangement was that the mother would take the children to meet the grandparents and that the grandparents would take the children for ice cream. As it happened, I turned up early for the contact session that day. And I parked my car, and as I'm parking my car, I see mum walk across the car park with the 2 children. And I thought, great, they're all here. This is great. The grandparents will definitely be here because I knew they were very excited about seeing their grandchildren for the first time in a few years. And when mum came back with the children, they had ice cream. So that already scuppered the grandparents' plans to take the children for ice cream. They turned up to contact with the grandparents with ice cream in their hands, which was pretty hard for them, but it was fine. The grandparents quickly recovered and moved on. But when mum brought the children with their ice creams to meet the grandparents, and within a few seconds of meeting them, said, oh, girls, I've forgotten your coats. Let's all go back to the car. So she started to walk back to the car, and she was going to take the children away again. And fortunately, social services were there that day, and the social worker was with us. And the social worker said, I'll go back with mum to the car and get their coats. And then when the social worker came back, she said, oh, the coats weren't, the mum didn't have coats with her. So I don't know what that was about. It was, but certainly wasn't about helping the children enjoy their time with the grandparents. But anyway, the children, the younger girl would have enjoyed time with the grandparents, I think, if the elder child hadn't been there. But the elder child did spend most of the time interrupting the grandparents' conversation with the younger child by saying, you're bad people, you did this. You know, she used a lot of bad language. She said that they the grandparents had mistreated her mum. She gave lots and lots of examples of this. Your mum, you did this, you did that. I mean, silly things as well. You turned the television off on my mum. You know, really frivolous reasons are often given for alienating parents, but you know, that was one of them. And when mum came to collect the children at the end of their time together, I said to the eldest girl, shall we talk to mum about some of the allegations you made? I didn't use the word allegations, obviously, about some of the things you said that the grandparents had said about her. And the eldest girl said, we don't need to do that. I don't remember what they were now. So I don't know whether that came from her herself or whether that came from mum, but certainly there were, or whether mum had told the eldest girl this, but certainly the eldest girl was in this situation, was very troubled and disturbed by the allegations that had been made. The good news on this one is that the children still see their dad. They don't see the grandparents anymore, but they do still see the dad, which is great. And they just still live with mum. The impact on the children, there's an evidence base mostly written by Amy Baker in the United States. She found there's an increased psychopathology in adulthood, and these were her participants were people who said they had been alienated from one parent when they were a child. She found they were more likely to have alcohol and misuse alcohol and drugs. She found they had more problems in their adult relationships, and they had feelings of loss, abandonment, and guilt, low self-esteem, and poor quality of life in their peer group. Additional impact on children, and this is based on my own, Additional impact on children, and this is based on my experience. I feel that children are learning not to be compassionate for others. They're learning to be rude. They feel to lack understanding of others. They're failing to lack understanding, and they're failing to learn how to understand others. And they're learning that their needs are not as important as others. They're learning to support one carer and exclude the other. Although most children would like to have both parents if both parents wanted to be involved. So that is also very hurtful for everyone involved. They can feel rejected. There's significant research to show that parental rejection in childhood results in poor adjustment in adulthood. There are also findings to show that adults are more likely to experience depression and other mental health issues if they've been rejected during childhood. In my experience, adults who felt rejected by one parent when they were children feel angry. And I have written a lot of court reports now, and I've seen a lot of parents, and I feel that anger is a significant problem for parents who feel rejected by one parent when they were children. An assessment by a clinical psychologist, expert witness, is often recommended. Of course, in the cases that I see, it's always recommended. The assessment involves meeting all the parties involved, parents and the children. And typically I'll see the parents, both parents with the children, as you can learn a lot about a family from observation of their current situation. Now, I'm going to tell a little story about this because, which is why I've written E.G. Disney to remind me. I saw a situation a while ago where two parents, and I can't seem to tell this story, I've practiced it, and I can't seem to tell this story without without disclosing that it was a man and a woman, rather than two men or two women. So it was a man and a woman, and the children were a boy and a girl. And so the parents separated, and the boy and the girl remained living with the mum and saw dad for contact. That was fine for many years, and they also spent half their summer holiday with him. Well, during one of the summer holidays, one of the children came home, the boy, and he said the girl didn't want to come home just yet. So mum didn't worry, and she said, oh, that's fine. And she wasn't too worried about it. She said, oh, well, if she wants to stay, that's great. You know, she can enjoy her time with dad. That's fine. Eventually, at the end of the summer, the child didn't return to the mum's care. And in fact, the mum didn't see the child again. She actually didn't see the child again. That was the end of it. The child changed schools. When I'd met the child, she changed schools twice. And when I observed the child with the dad for contact, the child made a reference to going to Disney with the dad. So when the child left the situation, sort of ran off into the playground, I said to dad, so you guys are going to Disney then? And he said, oh, well, we'll go to Disney sometime. So this child felt that she was living with dad, and one of her motivators was that she was going to Disney with him. And that you know, it was very difficult. But anyway, it just shows how easily children can be manipulated if a situation arises. It wasn't just about Disney. I couldn't say that it was just about Disney, but that was certainly a factor for this child. And certainly she was manipulated into not wanting to spend time with her mum anymore. Not just about Disney, but other things. If an alienating parent is threatening or abusive, then we need to stop and return to court for advice, because these cases are very hard, and the alienating parent is often abusive, and it can be very difficult for us to know how to manage that sometimes, because that's something else that we don't always know how to manage or what to do about it. So recommendations are to try and help the family whilst remembering the impact of the current situation on the child. The optimum outcome for the children is, of course, to have a really good relationship with both the parents if they can be. That's the same for all children, no matter whether the parents are separated or not. Children should not move to the care of the targeted parent and then exclude the alienating parent from their lives. And I've read time and time again that happens. I mean, that's not been my experience in the cases that I've been involved with, but I feel that it's quite important that when children move to the care, or if it happens that they're moved to the care of the other parent, then they don't stop seeing the first parent. You know, that's not, no one wants that. Everybody wants the children to have relationships with both parents if possible. Recommendations. depend on the outcome of the assessment, but there can be joint contact, no contact, or a change of residence. We rarely recommend a change of residence, in my experience anyway. Clinical psychologists rarely recommend a change of residence, but it does happen. And in a court situation, an expert only offers advice to the court anyway. The ultimate decision maker is the judge. Outcomes. Treatments for parental alienation cases specifically haven't been identified because there are lots of different things happening in parental alienation, and we need to look at those. But so there are outcomes relating to specific problems that are seen in parental alienation, and these have been formally measured, and the intervention is found to be helpful with large groups of people, and they're recommended by large organizations like, for example, the National Institute for Health and Care, the NICE guidelines, National Institute for Clinical Excellence. So, and an identification of specific problems is likely to be helpful if the participants are honest. I thought I'd put a slide in about honesty. People often have their own view or memory of how things were or are, and these memories can be real or imagined. Challenging for professional people, challenging a parent's truth is fruitless. I mean, there's just no point in doing that. But social desirability tests show that most people give socially desirable results, particularly in court settings. One possible intervention that I've seen work is that the child moves to the care of the targeted parent. They then can develop a relationship with the targeted parent without any intervention from the alienating parent, just for a little while. In the meantime, the alienating parent has supervised contact. So the child still sees their first parent, alienating parent or preferred parent, whatever you want to call them. The child still sees that parent while the parent completes therapeutic intervention, not the child, because it's the alienating parent who needs help. Whilst therapeutic intervention is then carried out, and I typically recommend compassion-focused therapy, although other approaches may be indicated depending on how the alienated parent is doing. The reason I recommend compassion-focused therapy is because it enables the alienating parent to learn how to be compassionate to not just themselves, but to others. So it's a kind approach to alienation. On successful completion of therapy, co-parenting can begin, and this can work for some parents. It doesn't work for everyone, but it works for some parents. Alternative outcomes are that the alienating parent, on hearing that the child is to have a transferred residence, suddenly supports contact with the targeted parent. Now, I've seen this so many times, I have to say. Sometimes the alienating parent drifts away as well. So sometimes the children are moved to the care of the targeted parent and the alienating parent just drifts off and goes away. I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens to those parents. Sometimes the alienating parent engages the intervention and the outcome is good. And I did see one case where the alienating parent and the targeted parent ended up being able to go to each other's houses for dinner. That was all good. Or sometimes the outcome is undecided and the case continues. I wrote the book because there were lots of negative comments about people who believed in parental alienation, and lots of negative publications about people who believed in parental alienation, but yet it seemed to happen anyway. And when I did that talk to magistrates, they for sure were worried about children not wanting to have contact with one parent. I have to say that not all cases that look like parental alienation are parental alienation. So sometimes a child can have a justified reason for not wanting to see their parent. And Richard Warshak, who I've mentioned many times this evening, has also written about this. I also should say that not everything that's written is true. What is an operational definition? This is my own thing about it all. I feel like there should be a proper, an agreed description of parental alienation so that everyone's talking about the same thing. There should be an accepted way to assess the situation. I feel that focus groups like this one, Alienated Children First, are good for raising the profile of this problem. I feel like there should be a way of replicating and repeating studies to ensure that the findings can be considered and examined. Now, what this means is that people can compare studies as well if we're able to talk about what we've done and how we've done it. And this would be a way of reducing the argument, This would be a way of reducing the argument about whether parental alienation exists or not, as some people say that it doesn't. And it would also enable researchers to focus and spend their energy thinking about how to improve the situation for the families who are struggling with this issue. And it would mean that we'd stop talking about whether or not it really happens. General problems with the literature. Not everyone will agree to participate. So are those who do, a particular group, of course. If we're going to try and learn more about parental alienation, why it happens, are we going to only look at some people? I guess that might be the case. Most of the current literature is carried out with people who say they were alienated, but this was not assessed using an agreed definition of what it was. So these are people who try to remember what happened when they were young. And the literature generally involves adults who say they were alienated as children, and therefore they could be subject to memory problems, etc. What next? We need to operationally define or agree on a way of describing the concept to improve the quality of research. We need to continue to carry out and improve the research and talk about the concept with parent training groups. And we need more education, like, for example, Alienated Children First offer education and support after this has happened. And it can be very good for parents who feel alone in this situation. And then we need to continue to carry out research, and there are support groups and other groups carry out research. For example, the Dolce Vita Project is a charity in Northern Ireland, carries out some research in this area. And there are lots of academic groups in the United States and Italy and Australia and other countries that are carrying out research on this area, but not so much in the UK. Some of the research, this is some of the recent research. I just did a quick search of the recent research to look at whether or not anybody had done anything recently. Jennifer Harman again with Richard Warshak, Lorandos, I don't know Florian, I don't know that name, but they looked recently at the growing interest in the scientific basis of parental alienation. And again, they pointed out too that the language, etc., impacts the acceptance of the concept, which is true. Roma, they're the group that are based in Italy, recently looked at the personality of parents involved in this. And that last study was carried out, by Tavares, Crespo and Ribeiro, a Portuguese study, and they looked at the experience of targeted parents. That was also a recent study. So in conclusion, this is a set of behaviours, and the relevance of these behaviours to child mental health is high. Parental alienation is distressing for all involved. So if these behaviours involve your family, it can be disruptive and hurtful. It's very hurtful if these allegations are made against you and they're untrue, and you love your children and you don't see them anymore. Sometimes it involves false allegations of physical and sexual abuse, which are particularly disturbing. But the good news, and I wanted to write something good before I finished, is that the term parental alienation is increasingly recognised by professionals, I feel anyway, and the term is growing in its acceptance and understanding, and we just need to do more and keep working on it. And these are some of the references that I talked about today. I couldn't put all the references in because there were so many of them, to be honest. So I'm finished, Ken.
Well, hang on. We just want to memorize all of those references first. Now let's go through those in detail, shall we? No, I'm kidding. Well done. Absolutely fabulous.
Well, I thought the slides might be
put all the references up at the end. It was absolutely superb. Thank you so much for that. A really thoroughly enjoyable, Denise, and very well put together. I suppose one of the things that kept coming to my mind throughout your presentation was, if I'm a lawyer and I have a client who is alleging that parental alienation is going on in their case, and I've heard, oh, parental alienation doesn't exist, which is something I want to touch on again in a moment. So I get this book, Parental Alienation, an evidence-based approach to all the names associated are credible. It's regarded as a handbook for parental alienation. Where do I start with the book to assess my case?
Oh, right, okay. You see, I've written a book for professionals, so sorry for people who are going to be looking at these cases. So you would either I mean, this is a process that happens in court anyway, I feel, but they'll employ a clinical psychologist to assess the situation, or they'll have a guardian ad litem. Quite often will be, I mean, we don't do the same job, we do different jobs, but a guardian ad litem will also assess the situation, or a social worker. It just depends really on the nature of the case, and I'm not too sure how that decision making is made, but yeah. Depends on the case.
You know, the way you'd have a client say, well, I don't know about this parental alienation thing, you know, let me see, does it, you know, where's the boxes to tick to see if this looks like a PA case?
Yes, well, yeah, I mean, that's why I talked about the operational definition at the end about us all. Sorry?
Jennifer Harman had a, was it her 5-factor model that she?
Oh, I think that's William Burnett's 5-factor model. Or maybe Jennifer Harman's on that too, but I think that was William Burnett's 5-factor model.
Subscribe to that?
Yes, I mean, it's an idea, you know, it's one of the ideas, a way of describing it. I can't actually remember the 5-factor model now, to be honest, but I do know that I've read it, and I can't remember what it said.
I suppose what I was thinking the whole way through was, you know, it is, I mean, those of us involved in it on a regular basis become quite familiar, and I suppose a little blasé about, you know, well, obviously everybody knows that, but of course they don't.
No, exactly.
And it's difficult to ensure that you tick all the boxes for those that don't, in terms of explaining what it is. So
yes,
it occurred to me, wouldn't it be a great help if there was like one A4 page that said to professionals involved who are not as deeply involved as yourself and the experts of whom you spoke, but it said parental alienation, this is the definition. This is the 5-factor model that tells you whether it's happening in your case or not. Here are some of the things to watch out for and identify and treat and assess just how severe it is. And these are the solutions. And here's the support group. It would be so helpful, I think, to distribute something like that around the academia and particularly the professionals in the legal circles.
Well, of course, that would be perfect, but so many people have tried to do that. Richard Gardner originally had 8 factors, you know, and a lady called Kopetsky, a social worker who worked at the same time as Richard Gardner, had similar kind of findings to him. And there are lots of different people along the way. Gina Rowlands has tried as well. Lots of different people along the way have tried to define it. But I think it would be really helpful if we had a definition that everybody agreed on. I agree with you on that. I think
that's where the you know, the international organizations, the DSMs, etc., really could be of great value, because they would be the recognized authority on such things, would they not?
Well, you see, the DSM is for diagnosis. So yeah. Only if you want parental alienation to be a diagnosis, or it depends on whether you want parental alienation to be a diagnosis, or whether or not you want parental alienation to be thought of as a set of behaviors, much in the way that domestic violence is a set of behaviors, but everybody understands what domestic violence is.
And nobody questions the possibility that maybe it just doesn't exist.
Well, people do ask that. People do say that, and that's why I wrote the book, actually. Yeah, sorry.
People say domestic violence doesn't exist.
Oh, sorry, but not domestic violence. No, nobody questions whether or not domestic violence exists. I think there's a general acceptance.
Yeah, I was fascinated. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but you said that you know, some people believe that parental alienation does not exist. Full stop.
Yes.
You know, it's a bit like saying, oh, there's no such thing as murder. Well,
I know.
So there is such a thing as murder, because we can see the bodies, we can see the dead people, and guess what? When it comes to parental alienation, we have bodies too. I know. Why do people say it doesn't exist? What is the motivation?
I don't know. I've thought about that myself, and I don't know why people say that, but people do say that, and there are some very strong groups of people who lend a lot of weight to that.
What kind of groups, Denise?
mostly women's groups. You know, a lot of you see, a lot of people think this is something that men say about women, but it's not true. But actually, men are alienating children as well. Sometimes, you know, they're just as likely as women are to alienate a child. I think there needs to be growing an understanding and acceptance of that before we'll bring about some change. I mean, hopefully there will be change in the future, but we're not there yet with it, you know.
We understand from what you said that the perpetrators of parental alienation may or may not be narcissistic, but they would tend to lack empathy. And yet the recommended treatment that you suggest is compassion-focused therapy. Surely compassion is something that 50% of the alienating parents are just not going to get.
Well, look, the idea is compassion-focused therapy involves helping the person learn how to be compassionate.
Okay.
You know, so you're helping them learn to be compassionate towards themselves as well and others, you know, because, you know, it's important as humans that we all learn how to be compassionate and kind to ourselves and others. And that's what you want to teach them. And you know, that's what you want to teach parents who hurt their other partner, their ex-partner, or hurt their children, actually, more importantly, you know.
There's a debate, Denise, that I've heard raised numerous times lately, that this is all as a result of the demise in religion, and people don't have a God in the world anymore, and they've nobody to tell them what's good and bad, and therefore everybody's just devouring each other, and where society is becoming dystopian, etc., etc. But one thing that I found very, very touching was a guy said to me, I really wonder, am I doing the right thing by trying to get my kids to grow up as nice people, when my ex will teach them how to be hard, how to use people, how to take advantage of situations, how to lie, and they're far more valuable skills in the world in which we live.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true? Is there a benefit to being brought up with maybe skills that, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, will be beneficial in the world? I mean, psychopaths tend to rise to the very top of industry, don't they?
Well, I suppose that's a broader social question, really. There were lots of things in there, religion, later, whether or not we should teach our children to be nice people. I suppose it depends on how we want society to grow and change, you know, whether or not we want society, do we want people to be nice people? Do we want them to be kind? Do we want to encourage those things and develop those qualities, or do we not? What do we want for the future, you know, for children? Certainly children who have been mistreated as children, you know, children who have been mistreated are less likely to be happy adults. They're more likely to have mental health problems, and surely we don't want that.
And it's also the case that people who perpetrate parental alienation in many cases have themselves been alienated, I understand. Is that your experience?
Well, yeah, there have been some research findings about that, yes, that some people, but not all.
Yeah.
Some people, but people, generally people who have been alienated or who are alienating parents will say that their home life was perfect. That's my experience.
But is that because they're in denial and putting on a facade they want the rest of the world to see, that may not be anything other than a function of the insecurity from which they suffer that you described earlier?
I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that, but I mean, that's something for discussion, and that's something people want to look at.
Indeed. As I have the opportunity to look quickly at some of the questions that come in, Denise, which reunification programs, and I suppose the caveat to that could be, if any, does Dr. McCartan consider evidence-based?
Oh, well, the only one I consider evidence-based is Richard Borshak's The Family Bridges approach, which is the only one, as I understand it, that has an evidence base for its efficacy, you know, for its being helpful
And the same question.
We don't have the reunification program, so we don't.
No, I don't know of any in the
No, we don't have them here.
In Ireland anyway. Perhaps in the British Isles there are some.
No, I don't believe so.
Just America.
I think there's something else called a reunification program, but it's not what they mean by reunification program in the United States.
And I don't think I have ever heard of a case, apart from once, a man who was alienating his wife. There was a transfer order put in place where she was to go to the house to pick up the kids, and they were to move in with her. Of course, when she got there, all the kids were screaming, shouting, saying, "Go away, mommy, we're not going with you." And the door wasn't opened. That was the end of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, I suppose a lack of familiarity on behalf of the authorities to the situation and what the likely outcome is going to be if a woman turns up to a house saying, "Well, I have a court order now saying I'm taking the kids back."
Well, that way it wouldn't happen in that way, in my experience. Usually social services are involved or somebody's involved. It's
Certainly should be in that situation, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they definitely are here.
The question that was posed earlier then about what do you consider evidence-based has also been posited with regard to diagnostic methods.
Yeah, so what's the question again?
Which diagnostic methods, therefore, do you consider to be evidence-based?
Well, all diagnostic methods are evidence-based. They have to be.
Okay. Any specific assessment tools re parental alienation? Well, we suppose we've touched on that for Helen.
Yeah, a few people are working on specific assessment tools at the moment, but nothing that's generally accepted.
There's a question: how do you explain how PA is being removed from the ICD-11? Have you answered that?
It's not being removed. It was never there in the first place.
Yeah. And for reasons that you said were that it's whether or not it's a diagnosable condition, is it?
Yes. Is it something you diagnose, or is it like domestic violence? Is it something that happens?
Craig Childress, of whom you've probably heard, a former guest on our series in the US, focuses on attachment-based alienation. To what extent do you believe that this is accepted? Attachment,
or attachment-based?
Yeah.
I don't know if I really understand the question.
I suppose is it a potential other word for alienation? For Karen Woodall, have you come across Karen's work?
I've heard the name. She's a nurse, I believe, by background. Is that right?
That's where she started, yeah. And I think she got into therapy then, but very well regarded. And I have to say, her presentation on this program was very good and very well received. And Karen believes that the words parental alienation, by virtue of the fact that they attract negativity, just don't need to be used. Use a scientific description of what's going on instead. But you said earlier that you feel that parental alienation is gaining ground and is becoming accepted, which is therefore presumably a useful layman's description.
Yes, I think so. Although I don't use it in court reports either, for the same reason that Karen described. That some people, it's used as an argument. It's used as parental alienation doesn't exist, therefore parental alienation doesn't exist, therefore everything you say is not valid. So I just don't use the language, and then I don't have.
And what language do you use?
I just talk about whether or not I feel a parent is rejecting or manipulating, or I have used the term parental alienation in the court a few times, but only a few times before I wrote the book. Really, before I really understood how many negative connotations there were.
Yeah, and it's bizarre that there are, and where did they come from, and that you kind of mentioned earlier that there are various different predominantly women's groups, I think you said, that are actively against the term.
Yeah, there are a few people.
How do you talk to kids who are alienated and have not seen very much that you haven't seen very much since leaving the marriage? I find that kids are distant a lot and won't really engage. I guess the question is, when you have become alienated from the children, how do you reestablish a relationship? as a parent?
Well, it's not going to be very easy. And of course, it'll depend on how old the child is, what the personality is, whether it's a boy or a girl, whether they're into sports. Well, I suppose the gender thing probably doesn't matter anymore actually today, but whether or not they're into sports, what sports they're into, you know, whatever they're into, that's what you're going to look at and start to re-establish a relationship with them again. You have to get to know them again if you haven't seen them for a while.
And any tips on practical things that one can do to get to know your own child after you've been alienated?
I suppose a mistake that I see some parents make is that they think they pick things up from the last time they saw the child. But of course, if the child's 2 years older, they might not even remember the last time they saw you. And so it's really getting to where the child is now. And so I think, well, first of all, get the child's name right. That's something that parents do sometimes because they get very anxious. And also try and talk about something that's relevant to them and that's current with their current age. So you're not talking about cuddly bunnies when they're 14. I mean, that's a wide variability there, but that's just that's an example. But you know, you're trying to stay with their age.
And if you do find yourself in a situation where you have an assessor on your case, examining your children, you know that your ex-spouse is alienating them from you, that assessor just doesn't understand parental alienation. How do you explain to them what it is without offending them and perhaps insulting their professionalism?
So sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
Let's say somebody calls in Denise McCartan to be involved in a case, and Denise McCartan's never heard of parental alienation, doesn't know what it is, and you're the parent who's the victim of it, and your husband is being absolutely alienating. You're trying to explain to this professional psychologist what parental alienation is. As you've said, a lot of people still don't understand it. How do you guide them gently to, for instance, a book like yours without insulting them?
Yeah, I don't think you need to use the language parental alienation or guide them to a book, because I do think that would be a bit insulting. I think you just tell the truth. You know, you just say, this is my experience, and I feel that this child is being manipulated by my ex-partner, and you just tell it as it is. And obviously, if someone's assessing you, they'll be the one asking the questions and controlling the conversation mostly, or listening to you. So you won't have to worry, I would think.
Denise, it's a fascinating subject. I'm so pleased that we finally have something like this. There's a picture of the book for you. Parental Alienation, an evidence-based approach. Denise McCartan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Oh, I have one thing to say.
Please.
You said earlier that we shouldn't, I think it was Karen Woodall said, we shouldn't use the term parental alienation, and we don't. We should use some other term. But the only thing is that if we don't all agree on a term, you know, then how do we talk about it? How do we talk about it if we don't agree a term? That's my closing argument, sorry. Yeah,
okay. Point taken, and thank you again for it. I really appreciate you coming.
Right.
It's been absolutely wonderful. We do have just a couple of things I wanted to mention as well, with special thanks to Denise there. We have the Irish government currently has a request out for information, for a request for stories from parents who have been alienated, to supplement their report on parental alienation that they are currently digesting. There's only 4 days left. If you have a story about parental alienation that you think the Irish government should know, you can submit it directly to the Department of Justice. You can do so anonymously via alienated.ie. Go in there and you will find the appropriate link. Also, we have our walk, Charlie McGill walk. You can find out about that as well on alienated.ie. He's going to do something absolutely obscene, like a marathon a day, to raise awareness of parental alienation, which I think is a wonderful thing. And on that note, let me again, as I say, always direct you to alienated.ie, where you can find out all and everything you need to know about parental alienation and how to get a copy of Denise McCartan's latest book. From myself, Kenn Joyce, and all of us at alienated.ie, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time.